Okay, they've unearthed a new mega city they're calling Megalopolis here in Israel. It's something that I made a video on about 2 years ago where they'd found it and were working on it. And at the time, they was near a place called Wadi Ara, and that was believed to be in an type part. Now, don't quote me on this exactly. From what I hear, they were building up this reservoir here, which is lacking a little bit. And if you can make it out, there is a road right here that's running by this place. You can see all the people are doing archaeology here and around on here, and there's quite a few people on site. Look at all these porta potties. And they were building a road coming into this that ran into the very first of it. And so they pulled all their equipment up over here and all over here and started to work on the site, and then realized that they were driving all over the site anyhow, and did a test dig over here and there wasn't anything, and then they started building there. And the street that's over here, you can see they've piled on a large amount of dirt through here that all excavated from the area here all the way around the corner and all the way from out of these pits. And so they're finding all of these findings that wouldn't just be stonework but other things, and they're looking at them all in these pits here, and there are quite a few tents that are there, and a major one that's here that's shown. You can see the size of this. The people are here. Now this squareness that you see right in here and stuff, and a lot through there, that's not actually the shape of the walls and so on that they're going off of. These are pits that they've dug sections till they find things and so on. But they have found this little roadway that goes in through here, around and out through here. And there's a little bit of a tell mound that's down here in the lower area, and I believe that this goes out much larger, and they describe it carrying an area that is much larger than this. And it's possible they're just in an open area here where they dug their pit, and they're even still somewhat on top of stuff. It's possible that it even goes under this wadi here and so on. But as they excavate it more and more is going to come out about it, and I'm looking for the very first articles on it that they come out with. But really, more interestingly, I want the secondary interpretation that goes on after people have seen a lot of it and compare the two, and then glean a third aspect out of it all, like I usually do. So let's get into this. Now, it's listed as 7,000 years old, so 5,000 BC, but that's not the major portion of it. So they're listing it as 5,000-year-old Canaanite megacity unearthed in Israel. Archaeologists working for the Israel Antiquities Authority have announced the discovery of a major city which they are calling Megalopolis. The site is rich in historic finds. Most of the site, it dates back to 5,000 years, and parts of it goes back to an astonishing 7,000 years, or 5,000 BC. The city is expected to rewrite the history of urbanization in the Levant and the early history of Canaanite society and culture. Notice they're not calling it Hebrew in any way, and they'll make a distinction of that here shortly. The large prehistoric city was unearthed during excavations at the En Isur or Ain Asawir archaeological site located near Wadi Ara, a major artery that stretches from Hadera to Afula in the northern Sharon Valley, reports the Jewish press. And I made the joke, the Ara, and they live around that, and that's the Aryans. It's not far from one of Israel's newest cities, Harish. The settlement that dates back to the Bronze Age is approximately 160 acres in size. So this is just a piece of it, and they've apparently done a few pits and stuff and realized that it spans this entire area. Now, probably can't watch this video unless I kick it out like this. Let's see if we can.
We're standing here in the archaeological site of Asur, an excavation conducted on behalf of the Israel Antiquity Authority, financed by the Netiv Israel Company for the construction of new roads towards Phoenicia. About 5,000 years ago, in Egypt, the first state was established by the first pharaoh called Naamer. Here in Enasur, one of the earliest cities in the land of Israel was established. This is one of the most important sites today in the land of Israel, the city where about 5,000 to 6,000 people were living. It's sited about 700 dunam. It is much larger than any known site in the land of Israel and outside the land of Israel, in the regions of Jordan, Lebanon, southern Syria. The next.
Wow, that's amazing. It's that large. I just want to cut in here for a minute. It shows you, and the Egyptian settlements and so on that go on. So this is Levant, and it carries it on, and it seems to be very contemporary at the time with some of the oldest places we can find, Malta and so on. Jericho might date just a little bit older than this, but not much. And now we can see these Natufian type of cultures and what spawned out of those that we were talking about in a recent video. And let's continue.
Natural advantages here are very clear. You have very close water sources. Also, you have very good agricultural land, and you are very close to central trading routes.
The excavation of this site revealed two main settlements. The earliest one is about 7,000 years old. It's a very large agricultural settlement. 2,000 years later, another settlement became one of the first cities known in this area of the world.
So this is probably your first, Natufians is the first setup that's going on there, although it's not been revealed yet in any way. And then the secondary setup is probably a coupling of the secondary wave of people that showed up just a few thousand years later. And things were already happening and stomping, but then all of a sudden there seems to be this huge embellishment of growth, and corresponding roughly to the same time as it does North African Egypt. It's already kicked off in Samaria, though. It's already kicked off northern of this area, though. And so it's a blending back down, and we can see it definitely. And this is another connective site that really is going to show some importance.
We are standing in a street, 5,000 years old. The street actually separates from two areas of domestic buildings. We're talking about organization of the people and something very planned and very thoughtful. The building that we see is completely unique. It's not like other buildings that we found in the site. Its size and different features said that it's something else. And as the excavation continued, we started to realize that this is a public building, most probably a temple or a shrine. We found this cylinder stamp impression. In it you can see actually a man holding his hand up in the air.
I wish I could go right back to that. So you can see this man holding his hand up in the air. Oh, it's going to have this on there? Can I turn that off? Oh, yeah, okay, so a man holding his hands up in the air, and the symbology. Wish I could see that just a little bit better. Someone's going to interpret it quite well for us and everything. Very interesting.
Yeah, another very unique find from the temple is a figurine of a man.
That looked very Ubaid in look. Very bean-headed looking, if you will, and so on.
ממנה אלפי בני נוער. כל שבוע קבוצות חדשות שמגיעות, הם יוצאים מכאן אחרי שבוע והם לא מאמינים שהם אף פעם קודם לא עשו את זה. הם מרגישים כאילו הם מקצוענים לכל דבר.
אני מרגישה כאילו התבגרתי, כאילו פחות בגיל, אבל יותר בלמידה שלי על המקום. הבנתי יותר, למדתי יותר.
The study of this site will change forever what we know about the emergence, the rise of urbanization in the land of Israel and in the whole region. And it means that what we know now will change what is written today in the traditional books when people read about the archaeology of Israel.
Interesting. Interesting. And I've been showing a whole lot of that and what you read versus what reality is on such things. Um, so 5,000-year-old metropolis, over 700 acres in site, some of it 7,000-year-old. The Times of Israel reports the city is the largest early Bronze Age settlement excavated in Israel. Estimates state of the urban center would have been regarded as a metropolis in the Bronze Age, and probably had a population of 6,000 inhabitants, as he had said. It is also very possible one of the very earliest cities in history, and certainly showing in that region. And while there might have been other small ones, this seemed to have been a metropolis. This wouldn't have been 20 to 50, perhaps 100 homes making a little town type thing. If we think about today that there are little towns, and then there are larger towns and cities, and then there are huge cities today, right? And that these things on level that most of them which you would find perhaps would not be on larger cities, but once people started putting all of their combined efforts together, it became something that was much larger. The city was well planned. It was situated in a fertile area, which is also on some important trade routes. It was probably very rich for its time, and people from a diverse range of cultures possibly lived side by side. Atai Eldad Paz and Dr. Dina Shalem, excavation directors at the site, stated that the city was the early Bronze Age New York of our region, a cosmopolitan or planned city. So this wasn't something that actually grew out of nothing, but much like the early Roman cities that they went and built and so on, you can see that it had a planning to it. It wasn't that there was just one little part in the middle. Today's largest cities that you look at, like Dallas and New York and so on, you can see that there was a portion of it that was the early city, and everything cubed off of that and comes out of it, and all major cities and stuff, whereas this one seemed like, other than the early part of the site that they find, this was all designed out for a reason and to grow and to get big, and seemed to have happened around the same time and didn't span too much of time. But as they look through more artifacts and get radiocarbon dating, it might relate that it wasn't just, I don't know, you might think now that it was kind of small, sitting there for 2,000 years, and then boom, and it appears that way in some aspects, but maybe it kind of grew and grew and grew, and then once they got the Walmart and the Wendy's and all the different shopping centers, all the little bitty towns from near there came to the major metropolis, and boom, it grew. Anyhow, the city was enclosed by walls and fortifications, and there were also public spaces and private dwellings that were built around squares. Some alleys and streets have also been uncovered. That showed you right there, they were walking down a street they were talking about. The sophistication of the remains exposed indicates The sophistication of the remains exposed indicates an organized society and a social hierarchy. Oh, okay, I was freaking out on the quotes that were trying to be. According to the Xinhua News, and here's another thing that's talking about it in the ritual temple. Let's see if we can get it to roll right. And here you are walking down a street coming in. You would have stepped up into that building, and that building, walked through and walk into this building. But this building is quite a bit bigger. Maybe that's one they were talking about. Huh. You can see all the different ways it's built in. That's pretty cool. Huh. Very much a basin with a drain. Whoa. Yeah. Huh. And an area around it. Gonna have to figure out what they're talking about. That is this a bath type thing? What is this? Ah, look at a circular temple here that's It's got huge walls, thick walls built around. I wonder how tall this tower was. Huh. Curved walls, straight lines and curved walls, purposely built. This is all kind of drone footage here. Don't know if we're looking at fallen down walls or the thickness of an actual wall there, guys. That's quite thick for a wall. But we've seen thicker. Site's huge. Apparently this is CGI. The ritual temple they talk about, a very large public building, was also uncovered, and inside was a number of burnt animal bones. These were possibly a result of animal sacrifices, suggesting that the structure was a temple or a shrine. Also found there were some figurines, including a human head and the imprint of a man with his hands up, next to him an animal figurine. So that's what we were looking at before. This find is allowing researchers to understand the spiritual life and religious practices of the ancient inhabitants. But you can also see this animal figure in this master of beast kind of concept, if that's what that was. Now thinking back on it, yeah, there wasn't one on each side of him necessarily, but that makes connections. The city was probably inhabited by ancient Canaanites. Funny that he spells it that way, like dogs, but these were the people, and that's kind of where that came from. And it was built at a time when they were adopting a more complex style of living and social organization. The Canaanites, oh, he does spell it right there, greatly influenced the early Hebrews, despite them being often enemies. Yeah, I've exposed that statement a whole lot more than people would want it to be exposed, actually. But the god El of the Bible and temporal, and in fact Israel was the ancient name of Saturn to the Phoenicians themselves, and it kind of exposes the whole area, who these Phoenicians were. And in fact, the Phoenicians call themselves Canaan, and that shows you there's not really a separation like people were wanting to think of. And it was a mass conglomerate of people that were all named the same thing at one time, and then the merchants and the merchant class started showing a difference in literature at a much later date. Archaeologists have been trying to preserve the site for the past 2 years. This large-scale project was made possible by the financial support of the National Transport Infrastructure Company Limited. Now what this is, apparently, is them building those roads to go to that new city, and in doing so, in the offshoot that's to the little man-made oasis that's there, they ran into this site. How long would it have sat if they wouldn't have done this exact thing? And how many times have we run into something trying to dig a road and find a body or certain thing, and then all of a sudden everything stops as archaeologists come in? Some 5,000 students, both Arabs and Jews, volunteered to work on the excavations to help in the conservation of the site. Although it's looked as like neither the Arabs nor the actual Jew-type people would have actually been really the people that were here at the time, for that's something that happened much later, and actually a small window of time than the larger aspect of it. And this area would have always been under certain people's rule. At this time, it's looked at as being that they would have been their own entity at a time, but as things grew larger and larger, eventually Egypt controlled the Levant, Akkadians controlled the Levant, Persia run up, controlled the Levant, Greeks and Alexander and everything came down and controlled all of it back again, and so on, in a big chess game. So there are all these figurines. Most of these look like animals and maybe bulls and so on, and because these are your first farmers and cattle people, your first cowboys, if you will, though they don't have the horses in the area at this time, you can see a definite difference. Even a medallion, and that face also again looks bean-shaped and very Ubaid. But later, all these Canaanite burials that we find, This thing is probably just, smaller than a golf ball. But these Canaanite burials we find, and they make the face out to look something like this, but instead of squinty eyes just cut in as an artistic representation, they inlay white stones to it, and we've shown that quite a few times. So there's 7,000-year-old remains. Under the 5,000-year-old streets and structures, archaeologists have found some remains that date from 7,000 years ago to the point known as the Copper Age. So this is pre-bronze and adding of tin, arsenic compounds, anything. Our people call it the Chalcolithic era. The time of Israel's, quoting Shalem, said that the excavation at this site revealed two main settlements. The earliest settlement was much smaller than that later urban center. The Bronze Age city was built over the remains of the Copper Age settlement. And they talked about it being a modern New York and everything. So you can imagine when we bought that little island like that was called Manhattan, and we had that other little chunk, and then now you look at it today versus what that was built upon and what was there in ancient times versus its modern structure and how it expands out, and they can get an idea of that. But this remains the Copper Age, which most people don't even refer to necessarily. Paz and Shalom were quoted by the Jewish press as stating that the site dramatically changes what we know about the character and period and the beginning of urbanization. The sophistication in the Bronze Age may indicate a hierarchical society and may even provide evidence for an earlier state. The discovery of the city is also adding greatly to our knowledge in the evolution of the Canaanites in ancient Israel, and in fact all of the Fertile Crescent, and it adds one more notch there. Just like they're finding new things in ancient Britain, like sunken boat docks that were 35 foot below water now, that were actually only up 8,000 BC, showing you that they had a boating wharf and things going on at that time. And we're looking at all that starts to connect out of that and what connects out of this. And so there was much more things going on in areas than previously thought our excavations have shown. And of course, all early excavations were all tried to be deemed towards a certain era and a certain time of thinking and trying to correlate it with the Bible. But even we can find right in that area there an easy acknowledgement that this predates that so bad you can't even say it has to refer to them in itself. So like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. What's this? But wish the other part of that video would have shown. But this is a nice site here, and they only have a small portion of it. Now, so that we're looking at an acre almost here, and it covers 700 square acres. Yeah. So it's going to be like that Pompeii dig and go on for a long period of time and probably employ a lot of archaeologists. And so we'll be looking for secondary reports on this as it goes, guys. But like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy, and we'll get on to more interesting archaeological news. Peace.